A participant has joined the meeting. Has joined the meeting.
Sylvia.
Has joined the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. We'd like to call the Schenectady City Council Committee meeting for Monday, May 4th, 2020 to order. And we will go right into public safety. And first item is a COVID-19 update. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, we're proceeding as we have since this first developed, where police and fire are responding to normal calls. They've implemented, again, precautionary measures to keep them safe and the individuals that they're in contact. Summary showing a total of 518 years, 20 currently hospitalized, not all from Schenectady. Unfortunately, we've had 28 deaths in Schenectady. We're starting to review cautions in place to maintain the safety of both city employees and individuals who may be coming into City Hall to seek city services. Again, they have not been finalized, but it's being reviewed. Engineer Chris Wallen, along with the appropriate staff from each department. And as we progress on that, we'll keep the council informed of the progress. And again, hopefully some period of time when we'll get back to a closer level to normalcy.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, so Mayor, I know that you got the email, and several of us did, about there being a lot of activity in Jerry Burrell Park, people not distancing and also not wearing masks. I understand the picnic benches have been removed, so that's going to be helpful. But is there anything that could be done that, you know, what should happen when the people aren't going by the guidelines of social distancing and wearing masks in public? I mean,
And again, the rules as I understand them are if you're in public area or outside, you don't have to wear a mask if you are maintaining the social distance, which is recommended to be 6 feet. We
right,
hope that people are going to do this on their own, where we're still trying to engage in a conduct of education. It will become, Chief Clifford had reviewed some of this today, in terms of our ability to enforce these things, that we're not quite ready to do that at this point. But again, we will continue to monitor it and encourage all the members of the council and everybody to try and get that message out, where it's an inconvenience. It's a little change in our behavior to put a mask on, but it benefits yourself, and then it also benefits the public as a whole in minimizing the risk of infection of this virus. So, you know, if you see those situations, feel free to call the police. We'll try and send it out and again, initially engage in an educational process to advise people where it's just poor judgment on their part, but hopefully it won't get to the point where we're having to look at it in the perspective of doing actual enforcements and arrests.
okay. And so kind of a follow-up question, you mentioned education, and I know that and you also talked about that the county is giving out statistics like weekly or daily. But in terms of that, you know, I see it geographically, but I've had many requests and people talking about, are we going to be seeing anything about the demographics of, because we know this is disproportionately impacting certain communities. So is at any point we're going to be able to actually see the demographics as it relates to Schenectady, not just the state or even the nation?
We have actually put in place a fairly detailed tracking for the individual locations. Some of that is treated, whether somebody may have tested positive, somebody may be quarantined, or somebody that is just symptomatic and being evaluated. I don't know in that, council member, if we're breaking it down or if the information that is being provided to us gets into gender and race. And I'm not even sure if age is part of our tracking, but Matt Douglas and Heather Epson have done really a very good job putting that in an Esri system that we were initially doing in the city, and we're making that available now countywide. But it's something that we'll follow up on and ask if that information is being tracked and can it be analyzed and then be made available.
Okay, yeah. I'm not asking for specifically where people live, but just those demographics, so we could see how it's impacting this community. And I mean, and that's another thing that you could say to people: this is how it's impacting the community, as people are not going by the suggested guidelines.
Yes.
Also, I think the equipment needs to be retaped at Jerry Burrell too, because I think the tape's gone down. Sorry.
Mr. Multivaran, can I speak, please? Ed Kosher.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Porterfield and to the mayor. If you go to the county website, Schenectady County's website, they actually break it down into zip codes, Marion. And that's, I know it's not what you're looking for.
Oh, it's not.
It also has the areas broken into zip codes with those who actually have the COVID and those who are quarantined, and that's updated daily. And unfortunately, the 12304, 12309 are the two highest impacted areas within the county. But again, they do a great job on that. That's on the county website. Thank you.
Right. And Mr. Kosher, I understand about the geographics because I have looked and I go like every day basically to look, but really, really interested, and not just me, I've had many phone calls and many discussions about the demographics of it. So I understand the geographics, but really about the demographics. And I'm not asking any HIPAA laws be broken when you just, report out what gender people are, what race they are. I mean, that's stuff that when we want to give out CDBG money, we ask about people's ethnicities and age groups. So just similar kind of data as it relates to the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up, I know I had forwarded an email, and an email came into us with regards to Central Park. Mr. Mayor, I know we have police chief online also. Is there any way that we can add some more patrol into Central Park at least, maybe other hotspots? If that is possible.
We're reviewing that, and again, kind of the simple overview is that we've seen a general decrease in the number of calls for service, both officer initiated and initiated by the public. We saw a spike Saturday going into Sunday, where it just corresponded to the good weather. So we're trying to look at that information and data and then adjust the staffing accordingly.
Thank you. Much appreciate that. Any other questions regarding the COVID-19 update? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next item is authorizing the mayor to renew the contract with Mohawk Assistant Deputy Chief Marino.
Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, City Council. We propose this evening a renewal of a 3-year contract with Mohawk Ambulance. This is a long-standing contract, a long-standing agreement, I should say. Had a good working relationship between Schenectady Fire and Mohawk Ambulance. There are no changes in the language in this contract compared to the previous contract. As was the case in the last contract, there is an escape clause where either party can terminate the contract with a 60-day written notice. It's the same as
Questions from the council?
Mr. Moulton, question, please. Mr. Moulton.
Go ahead, Mr. Porter.
On page 9, your contract, page 7, the service charge for the MAC, was it 8% last year?
Yeah.
So it's been steady at 8% then, right? There's no
Mr.
increase.
Coulter, yeah, it's the same. There's no changes in that. There are no changes in the language.
No change. All right, very good. Thank you.
All the same.
Very good. Thank you.
This is John. With regards to response time, is that same from last year? No improvements going into this contract?
Everything in this contract, sir, is the same as the previous contract. It's the same language. Nothing has changed.
No, I understand, but in regards to response time, we're keeping it the same?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? May I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any other business for public safety?
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
So I want to bring city planning, development and planning to order, and I am assuming that Kristen Diot is on the phone, on the line also with the presentation of the 2021 proposed. You just my screen, Mr. Motivaren. I think it's the city is up first.
I'm here. This is Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
Good evening, everyone. I can share my screen here if let me just
Yes,
see.
go ahead and take the screen and share.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
And we see you.
You see me, but you don't see my screen.
I
No.
do not.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, can you see now?
That's good.
Yeah.
You got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, so first I just want to commend the development staff and all the support in terms of putting these plans together. Working remotely, it's really a lot to coordinate and review. So I just want to thank everyone for that. And just a brief discussion about the 2020 action plan and the 5-year consolidated plan in the context of the current pandemic. All of our applications for the 2020 action plan were received pre-COVID. The direction from HUD was to move forward as planned based on the applications we received so that we can get this submitted on time and highest needs in response to. We will also be receiving HUD stimulus funds as part of the CARES Act and developing a separate plan for allocations of that funding. And that's about an
Has
additional
joined the meeting.
$2 million in CDBG and ESG funding. So just as a quick update, we're working with our partners right now to collect data and track a change in needs before COVID and during COVID so that we can make informed projections of the short-term and long-term needs that will allow us to allocate that stimulus funding accordingly. So that's just kind of an aside as to some of the other things that are happening. The HUD Consolidated Plan, the City of Schenectady, we are a participating jurisdiction, and we are receiving the CDBG, home, and ESG funding every year. So we are required to develop a 5-year consolidated plan, which proposes a strategic investment approach focused on building capacity and using HUD funding to make a concentrated impact in key areas. We sent a summary draft of this plan, which we are asking to open public comment for. You can see the goals and priorities outlined there, which were informed a lot by stakeholder meetings with community members, public hearings, and also from the 2017 Community Needs Assessment that was conducted by HUD a couple of years ago. So we really were trying to bring together a lot of objectives and priorities from the last few years to put into this new strategic plan. The annual proposes allocations for the 2020 to 2021 funding. Again, this is subject to change in relationship to COVID-19 response and the final allocations from HUD. The national objectives that we need to address are the benefit of low and moderate income persons, the aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight, and meet community development needs that have particular urgency. So this just lists the outcome. The main outcome is that the City of Schenectady's neighborhoods are thriving, vibrant communities where residents and businesses are afforded viable opportunities to improve their quality of life. These goals are reflected in the various projects that we fund. So this year's anticipated funding is about $2.32 million in the Community Development Block Grant, $194,000 in the Emergency Solutions Grant, and $558,000 in the Home Investment Partnership funding. As many of you know, recently there was the merger of Community Land Trust and Better Neighborhoods Incorporated, increasing capacity in those areas. So just wanted to mention that as we look to restructure certain things. I wasn't going to plan on going through line by line the action plan summary. You all have it, and we're here for questions for anybody who has any. I know there was a question about the SHDFC program, and it's transition over to BCN. And the main reason for this is to basically streamline the homeownership counseling program, which happens through BCN, with the down payment assistance, so that we're aligning these resources and we're not duplicating efforts in terms of size and how many times they have to produce documents for different, at different times. We're trying to really just streamline that process, but the city will still take an active role in monitoring and working with ECN to make sure that our goals are being met through the management of that program. So tonight we're asking to open a 30-day comment period, which would begin tomorrow, May 5th through June 5th. And the written comments can be emailed to communitydevelopment@schenectadyny.gov. We'll have all of this information available online. And there will be a public hearing on May 27th at the regular scheduled city council meeting. So that is kind of an abbreviated version of everything. We are here and open if there are any questions.
Kristen, thank you. Well done in a difficult time. I have a couple of questions. First of all, how, because I can recall in years past, you would have, meetings where the community would come out and there'd be a time frame. How was the communication done to the entities as far as submitting the applications this year?
So luckily, this all happened before March. So we had a stakeholder community meeting in December, and then also 2 public hearings in relation to the consolidated plan and the action plan that were held at the Phyllis Bourne Library and also Mount Pleasant Library. And fortunately, we did those at the end of February. So we were able to get that input in the way that we normally would.
Okay, good job. My other question is, you said that there's going to be more funding coming in from the federal government. And you said that these numbers were not necessarily etched in stone. Do you anticipate any of the funding being diverted from anything that we have to put towards COVID, or is this all new money that's going to be brought in?
So the stimulus funding from the CARES Act is it'll have a completely separate plan. And it will not, these will essentially be 2 separate plans. But as we start to evaluate the impact and start to project the longer term needs, we may just need to reprioritize. And this might also come from the organization. They may have applied for funding for things that may not be their priority, depending on what happens with this, the outcomes of this pandemic. So we're just trying to make it known that we do need programs. We don't know if they will be able to happen, considering social distancing and all of that. So we're just trying to be mindful of all of those things and stay in close communication with our subrecipients and organizations so that we can just best align the resources to where they're needed the most.
So do we have a time frame? I know a lot of the funding that came through specifically with the PPP money and the SBA. Do you have a time frame and when we're going to be receiving this?
We did get what we would be allocated, and we are kind of working on a planning process for it in anticipation, but right now it has not been clarified.
I have some questions if you're finished.
Go ahead, Ms. Peraza.
So Kristen, how does this funding compare to last year's funding? Are we proposed to get more?
For which funding?
For the CDBG in general.
So yes, it is in addition, but it is also going to be part of a completely separate plan.
Right. So what I'm asking is the projects that you've already assigned money to, do any of those include the CARES Act?
No.
Okay.
Not this.
Can you get us a list of that, please?
Yes. So let's see that we did not fund last year. I think the only thing is the community loan fund. Typically, we provide about $20,000 for economic development funds to assist them, but we are anticipating working with them on the small business assistance and actually, through the CARES Act funding, because we know that small business, workforce development, economic development are priorities. So the intention is to really work with them to develop or enhance some of the programs they're working on to that end.
Okay, my last question is, there's a substantial increase in Habitat for Humanity's funding. Where did that come from? Where did that money come from?
So basically let me just pull up. So their proposal is to build 3 new construction projects, and because we are trying to prioritize redevelopment in the Mount Pleasant renewal area, they are proposing to redevelop sites that we have done demolitions on, and this has been noted as a priority for finding good use for these vacant sites, and also just they're in a place where their capacity has increased to increase the number of bills they
being funded, or how are we able to move?
funding. I think we're funding BCN through CDG and home, and so we kind of restructure. I think overall we're putting more funding towards housing and rehabilitation in this year's plan.
Okay, at the proposed housing system recommendations, everybody looks like they're funded on the same level, and then there's a huge bump. So that money had to come from somewhere else. Where was it last year?
I'm saying that I think we allocated more CDBG funds towards BCN, which is Combined BNI Community Land Trust. And so that's why we're able to allocate more home funds to Habitat for Humanity.
It's Karen. Lisa, I think, Kristen, you need to dive a little deeper into the programs that weren't funded last year. I didn't see anything for my side, and I know that we gave them money last year. So I think there may be some other organizations that didn't apply, or maybe didn't make the cut. So there may be
we didn't receive an application from
submitted application, and that could be where the funding increased from. I don't think it was just solely one entity, that the community loan fund. I think it's more than that. Is what I would ask you to go back and look to see who we funded. I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but I would look to see who we funded last year as opposed to this year.
Kristen, can you send us the list of what we funded in 2019?
Yep.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions actually.
Go ahead, Ms. Porterfield.
Okay, so first of all, every time that you mentioned how much CARE stimulus money, there was some background noise and I didn't hear it. So how much is it anticipated that we're going to get?
So let's see. It would be 1.365 million in CDBG funding and 671,793,000 in ESG funding.
Okay. All right. So how the CDBG is broken down. So it is broken down. We can spend it the way we spend it, similar to how we get our normal CDBG.
There's different regulations that are attached to that funding that are specific to disease response and disaster response.
Okay. So will we be getting that in terms of the council, in terms of the breakdown of how it can be spent as we do with the CDBG? Okay. And additionally, you talked about the that the BCN?
Yes.
Okay, it's taking over the role that the first home buyer program, and that the city will still be involved. So my question is, how is the city involved, and what is the board's role
through this transition? Because we don't expect this funding until October, November of this year. There is time to make whatever transition census on that. But the city is still gonna, like I said, be monitoring the program and working closely with BCN, Land Bank, our other partners in terms of, just aligning where these resources are going.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Karen, I have a question, please, or a couple.
Go ahead, Mr. Crozier.
Karen, Kristen, again, thank you and your group for putting this together. Again, job well done with the time period that we've had here, and working through all those applications. I know is a tedious job for you. So, if you may, we have 4 new programs and projects that are listed. Can you just give us a short synopsis, other than what is on our that was given to us, what these 4 projects are going to be? A little bit more for us, just to clarify.
Yep, and you're referring to the public service projects?
Yes, the Capital District, Center Independence, Big Brothers, Cocoa House, and Vale Urban Farms.
Yeah. So Vale Urban Farms is requesting 75% of funds from CDBG, which will be used to develop and implement an urban farmer training program and to expand educational programming for home gardeners. So this was a kind of big request. They requested $55,000, but they are receiving funding from other organizations because basically they've been kind of in the startup phase, but now it seems that they're really ready to this will basically allow for the hiring of additional staff, setting up a farmer training site with shed fence tools and program development. Additional funds will be leveraged, as I said, from other funders in the community, between this year and next year to sustain that program.
Is this the Fair Avenue project, Kristen, that they're moving to? You think, is that where this is?
I think this is at their. It may have to do with both sites, the Vale Urban Farm site and the Fair Avenue site.
All right. Okay.
In my understanding, it was both sites.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Similarly, Sikkim is working with the Cocoa House as well. And this again relates to food insecurity. So the idea here is to train 25 urban youth to grow food and maintain an on-site garden. And then there is some match funding here as well for salaries and supply. And then Sikkim would be the fiscal agent for that project. Big Brothers and Big Sisters, this is basically used for personnel costs for providing fostering futures. So it's supporting foster parents and mentoring support for children going through family court. This has been identified just as a need in the community. So we decided to propose funding that initiative. And then the Center for Independence, we used to fund this program. They used to have an office here in City Hall. Now they have a new location on Broadway. And we just proposed what we had given them in the past to support individuals with disabilities and services.
All right, very good. Were there any other new applications, Kristen, that did make the cut by any chance that you recall? I mean, if you can't, or you can
yeah, so there were a few applications. So the former Cheek Funeral Home, they had submitted a $150,000 application, but it was an ineligible project because it's a for-profit business.
Okay.
So we didn't move forward with that. What else? The Community Loan Fund, Create Community Studios gave a great proposal for an arts program in Hamilton Hill. We felt like this might be more relevant to thriving neighborhoods and didn't want to kind of duplicate efforts with some of the other things that are happening there. So we think it was a great proposal, but again, with our public service limitations, we thought this might, be best suited for another
project.
Another project. The Bright Hope Center submitted an application for $35,000, and it was not eligible because it is a paid service, a paid program for education. So a nonprofit specifically to serve low and moderate individuals, because a lot of what they do is kind of advanced testing for high school students. So we decided not to propose funding this, but can maybe consider it in the future again if they're partnered with a nonprofit. What else do we have? SJTA. We did not include that because we fund it through the city's general fund, and also we know that they receive funding through other sources. So it just, again, just considering the constraints of the public service cap, we thought that, you know, that was not something to include right now. And then the Schenectady Police Department had an application for Shotspotter, which is the gunshot detection technology. We thought that because this was more of an immediate need, we would have to look at kind of requirements further and just didn't include it in this proposed funding until we can look deeper into how we could support that.
Very good. Very
Thank
good.
Ms.
Thanks.
Zielinski, Waltunis, can I ask a question?
Karen, just one more one more question. I'm done, Carmel.
Okay.
Just during the public hearing here, it is scheduled for Wednesday, May 27th. And of course, the reason being Monday, the 25th is Memorial Day, and Tuesday is reserved for our Board of Assessment review. So the council would not be able to use those chambers. So the date of Wednesday, May 27th is correct for any.
Kristen, lots of work goes into this, I know, so great job. I know you mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted a little bit more detail. It does seem like several of the grants are probably to organizations that, you know, we're doing summer programs or face-to-face, in-person training programs. And you did mention that, you know, many of them would probably have to reconsider what they were doing, given the quarantine and how long, you know, that kind of thing might last. How will you, I mean, will you be kind of redesignating the funds to, how will you go about that process? Because it does seem like there's, you know, lots of money out there that might not be able to
be coming from the 2019 allocations. So as we do the planning efforts and work with our partners to determine the priorities, the highest priorities in response to COVID, we're basically going to anticipate reprogramming some of our 2019 allocations as well, because again, for this funding, we wouldn't receive it until the end of the year. And with all of the moving parts, we're just planning on working on understanding the needs, and that not only in the short term, but in the long term, so that we can really reassess, you know, all of this based on that. But it's kind of a moving target.
Okay.
I don't know if that helped, but it's sort of like there's a lot of uncertainty. We're trying to make projections based on data and things that we're hearing from organizations, and it's just a matter of, you know, continuing to do that and thinking about how we reprogram funding that can't be used for certain things.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I do have one more question.
Go ahead, Ms. Peraza.
Can you explain the rationale behind reducing the affirmative action job training program by $20,000?
So that is definitely that of our big priorities as noted in the consolidated plan. And the reason why is just because there's still some leftover funding from 2019 that needs to be used. And also we anticipate allocating some stimulus funding towards those workforce development efforts.
Ms. Lulski, I also have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Ms. Porterfield.
Okay, so Kristen, in terms of BCN, are we giving more now that BCN, you know, BNI is and community land trust are one entity basically? Are we giving anything above what they got when they were separate? Now that they're combined, are we increasing the overall allocation to the new entity?
I don't believe so. Dan, if you're on the call, you might be able to give a more detailed perspective.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, Dan is on the call, yeah.
Hello? Can you-
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay,
We
sorry.
can hear you, Dan. And also, if you wanted to explain more about Habitat too, it might be helpful.
So we did not increase funding to better neighborhoods, better community neighborhoods this year. We actually reallocated the majority of the money that was coming from Bethesda, going to Bethesda House, had been allocated in the past to better community neighborhoods for the rental rehab program. And when we discussed it, we just felt that before they took on a number of new rental properties and rehabbing new rental properties, we wanted to just wait to see if they had the capacity to do that.
And for Habitat?
Yeah, yep, and that's where the extra habitat money came from, the money that we had allocated to better community neighborhoods for their rental rehab in the past.
Right, that's correct. So there is $100,000 that we usually gave to BNI for rental rehabs, but because they still have funding from previous years to spend down.
We will get those two documents. We'll get the last year's document, 2019 document, to compare to this one, so we'll be able to see all that information in writing.
Yes, and I believe it should still be on the development website, but I'll make sure to send it to Sam.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Karen, Deshaun, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Mudavaren.
Kristen, under our in-house funding, code enforcement, what is the rationale behind, they requested 125, we're giving them, proposed to give them 90,000?
Why is it less?
Yes.
Are you asking? I don't think they typically spend the full allocation that we allocate towards them. I don't know, Dan, if you're still on, do you want to clarify?
How to it's kind of one of those hard things because we can't use it to offset city expenses. That's one of the few things we're absolutely not allowed to do. So we're just trying to find creative ways to use the money. So we have obviously a lot of needs. So we kind of thought that we just reduce it a little bit and then kind of move that money around to other projects.
Can you provide me that history of spending and what is remaining?
Yep.
Okay. The other question under demo, we're seeing last year funding was higher than this year. Is there explanation to that, or we're dropping from the amount of properties we're going to be demoing?
I think we just still have funding left over, especially since we couldn't move forward with our spring demolitions, given the COVID situation. So we're not anticipating any shortage there. We still have funding from previous allocations.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you.
Can I just have a follow-up on what Mr. Mudavaren kind of brought up in his question?
Go ahead, Ms. Portfield.
Right. So you talked about code enforcement, Dan, and how there was money that was left over that can't be spent in certain ways. And I think as a council we talked about having some of these properties maintained that the city owns, and about having small business do that. Is there an opportunity to be able to do that, especially if the small business falls under the CDBG? And then you don't have to answer that question right now, but I'm just wondering if that was a way for us to be able to fulfill what we're looking to do, and also spend the money so that we don't get it recouped, and then still, assist small businesses, because as we know, as a result of this, many small businesses are going to suffer.
Yeah, we're definitely taking that into consideration, Marion.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I make a motion to call for a public hearing.
I will second it. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Kristen, thank you very much. You did a fabulous job on this.
Thank you.
And if you could get those follow-ups out to the rest of the team, that would be great.
Absolutely. I'm not sure.
Take it away.
I was just going to say, I think he took it back. So, Kristen, don't go anywhere. I think the next item on the agenda is support a proposal extension request for the city's Stockade flood mitigation FEMA grant. So if you want to jump in on that, that would be appreciated.
Yep. So the city of Schenectady was awarded 8.6 million from FEMA for a two-phase approach. As you probably know, phase one was basically coming to a place of selecting an alternative. So we studied a lot of different options. We worked closely with the community, and the period of performance for that ends on June 30th. We need to ask for an extension given the limitations of COVID and just the complexity of the project. There's a lot of feasibility things that need to be studied. And so we're just asking that we're just basically going to be applying for an extension through Dishes and FEMA to ask for another year, and then the phase two construction be pushed until December of 2023.
So Kristen, I'm assuming that you've had some sort of conversations and they would be amenable to this, possibly?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we've been working, yep.
All right. So we're not going in cold. We've had discussions about extending this due to COVID.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Are there any other questions?
Make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Is there anything else that needs to come before planning and development?
Yes. Yes, Ms. Zulski was on it.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Porterfield.
Okay, so all of you should have gotten, this is a letter that came from a constituent, all of you should have gotten a copy of it. But it's about, there's a business over on Knott Street, which installed some new fans in their business, a pizza store shop. And the complaint from actually a couple residents is that it's creating the kind of noise that does not allow them to sleep at night. And the motors are just like constantly going. And so it's creating a noise disturbance. And I reviewed, I went by there actually and took a look, and they are huge. And additionally, I looked up the, under our city code, what this would come under. And if there is a particular part of the code that speaks to this, that says that if it's disturbing someone's sleep, that it's something that really needs to be addressed. So I think we need to take a look at it. I don't know if they have to have a permit to get it done because it does not overhang city property. It overhangs a parking lot, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed because, you know, people can't sleep. And again, the city code speaks to that. If a business puts in some kind of something new that disturbs the sleep and the peace of the people living around it, that the city has to address that.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
I can't hear.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm not aware of the underlying letter, and again, I'm interpreting this beyond the scope of the agenda that's been presented under the rules you work under now. If it's not on the agenda, we're not supposed to talk about it. So, Marion, if you want to send that to me tomorrow or whenever it's convenient, we'll get some appropriate follow-up.
Okay, well, yeah, all right. I'll make sure that you should have gotten one as well, but I'll make sure I will hand deliver it to City Hall tomorrow.
Ms.
You
Zulski,
can email it too under our social distancing now. It's quite all right too.
Oh, well, it came in paper. It didn't come electronically, but thank you.
Ms. Zulski Wilderness.
Yes, Ms. Peraza.
I have a question for Mr. Colden. It's my understanding that any council member can bring up in their committee issues that they want to discuss, whether they're on the agenda or
Has
not.
joined the meeting.
That is legally proper, what the mayor just said. I'd like some clarification on that, please.
I believe within the committee, the chair of the committee can bring up new business so long as the chair of the committee, a member of that committee can bring up new business and the chair to allow it to go forward.
Thank
But the
you.
governor's directive for these virtual meetings says that the items are supposed to be on the agenda and you're not supposed to add things during the meeting.
Generally, that's correct.
Yeah, I'll look into that, Mr. Mayor.
All right, let's proceed.
Okay, so am I officially adjourned?
No, you have to call for your,
Can I call for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Mr. Kosher, your committee.
Sir, yes, I will call to order the Committee on Administrative Efficiency, and we have one item to continue our discussion on amending the code of the City of Schenectady regarding affirmative action. And Mr. President, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you. This is ongoing. We had this on the agenda for a couple of weeks. Mr. Gardner and myself was able to come up with a proposed draft of amending Chapter 6 for the Affirmative Action Code. And what you have with you, and just let us apologize for getting it late today to the council members. Mr. Gardner had some issues with his laptop over the weekend, so he was unable to email it out until today. So what you have before you is a proposed amendment. We are presenting it today, hoping to move forward and calling for a public hearing. And in the meantime, we can work on the proposal to fine tune it through the council and legal and have a final document ready for the public hearing. Mr. Gardner, would you like to summarize anything?
Yes.
Additional changes that we had before we open for questions?
Yeah. We just had the one item in section 2, item 2.7, and I wanted to include some incentivize the contractors for complying with our stated goals as it relates to our policies and procedures moving forward. So that's the only thing that I added there. As we heard from a couple of the council folks, and one of the questions was specifically the code, or we put this in the policy, and the policy reflective of, or as the code going to reference what we're reflecting in the policy. And that was it. And the other question was on the good faith efforts section, and how did they come about? And I explained that these were the guidelines from directly from the Fed. It was 49 CFR Part 26 Appendix A, and that was the standard that they used as it relates to good faith efforts. So I just simply copied that as it states, and that's what's inserted right here, and in Appendix A. So that was that was the extent of the questions and changes that I saw.
Karen ZW, go ahead.
Has this been reviewed by Corporation Counsel yet, as far as tidying up the language and ensuring that it's within the legal guidelines?
Yeah, that is in the works. It's going to be worked on. Council or copied on this draft, and we tend to work with Mr. Colden and getting a finalized draft.
Okay.
Or ready for the public hearing.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Porterfield has some questions. Can we?
Yes, I do.
Yep, Ms. Porterfield. I got you now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so one of the things I said under section 6.6, this referred to change orders, and I just wanted to know if the language was consistent with what we had discussed about change orders in general. And And also, in looking at the code, which I've spent a lot of time looking at lately, under certain sections that it will refer to, let's say, for instance, if there's something under affirmative action that relates to purchasing, that at the beginning of the code, you'll also see, different ones say, make sure that you check this. Because my concern is that when people are looking at our purchasing policy, that we want to make sure that they are clear on all our MWBE language, and it's not something where they don't know that they need to take a look at this. So whether that means including it in under the purchasing policy or using that reference at the beginning of the city code, since we're writing an entire code, basically rewriting it. That's something I've never experienced before. So that was one of my concerns. And also, yes, and within the information that we have, it also gives the job description of the affirmative action. And I don't see anybody else's job description included in our city code, so I'm not sure that really needs to be there. Finally, Mr. Gardner really spoke to this in terms of the good faith efforts. And I just thought that we should, since we're actually pulling the language directly from the federal government and putting it in our code, if we're going to be doing that, if we should have something that says before that the city of Schenectady is using good faith efforts based on the federal policy, which is as follows, so that just so people know that this is actually the federal policy guidelines that we're using as part of our city code. I think, yeah.
Yes, we can insert that.
I like that language a lot, Marion, as well, John. Mr. Colden, any comments on this? I know we're just going to come to you, but a lot of changes here. And Andrew, do you have anything to say on that?
Honestly, I need to take a look at the whole document. I know
Yeah.
there are certain changes that were made. Obviously, I'll have to sit down with Ron and hopefully Council President Mudabaran to, well, at least maybe not sit down with them, but at least have a weapon with them.
Yes.
Go over the proposed changes to make sure that there are no questions, there are no ambiguities, to make sure that obviously everything is compliant with all state laws and federal laws.
And that is
our calling for a public hearing tonight, right?
Well, we will likely, if we can, to call for a public hearing, and in the meantime, we intend to the next day or two to set up a WebEx with Mr. Colden and review this. The public hearing is not going to happen next committee meeting. I mean, next council meeting is going to happen in the next couple of weeks.
If I could just, I'm sorry, Mr. Kosher.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Porterfield. Yes.
I mean, just in reviewing it, just from my perspective, I think that we have a little bit more work to do even before we call for the public hearing, because I really would like to make sure, first of all, that Mr. Colden sees it and weighs in on it, and that whatever that outcome is and any changes that need to be made, then the council see that again before it goes to the public hearing. I think that's a better way to proceed. As long as this doesn't, and my understanding is that it does not withhold us still putting in the policy in our specs in terms of MWBE, that this does not hold that up. My understanding is that would be something separate, and that we would still hold contractors to make sure they meet the MWBE guidelines without, this being already in place. So I really think we need to just make sure we're doing it. As I said before, we're writing an entire city code. And I think that we just want to really make sure that we've done it and done it well and aren't consistently doing amendments to it. That's,
I agree. I mean, I honestly, I didn't even skim through this today. And there's so much red ink in here. My goodness gracious, I don't even know where to begin. But it is a good document. And I think we want to make sure it is a good document. And I think that's to the point of Ms. Porterfield as well. That's really, I really don't think there's any rush to this. Let's really get this, work it out, work with Mr. Colden so he can really make the approval or changes that you folks might need, and then bring it back to us and, give us some time to read it over a weekend. I think that's going to be the best thing for us. So that's kind of my suggestion, and I don't know where the rest of the committee is on this, but that would be kind of what I would like to do. Hold off this public hearing until we really get this cleaned up, so we can move forward, have another good discussion, and get rid of the red ink.
We certainly we don't have a problem with that. It was all about Mr. Gardner and the signing, and the summer is coming, and we can getting new bids and things like that. So he wanted to incorporate this into the new bids, and the council had the proposed documents for a couple of weeks now. It's not much change been happening over the last 2 weeks for the master documents that we're sharing here now. So what we're going to be sharing back and what you have is nothing new, and there is no significant amount of change happen. So we can wait. I mean, we don't have a problem with that, but we just wanted to make sure Mr. Gardner have the document needed, and that was really the push from him to proceed and to make sure this move forward.
Yeah. Any other council members want to chime in? And what's the feeling of anybody else there that's council?
I would like to have Corporation Counsel review it and have his remarks on it before we move forward. Quite honestly, that's my opinion anyway.
All right, thanks. Karen, John, or Lisa, or anybody else? Carmel?
And let Andrew look at it.
Let him look at it. All right. All right.
Same here.
All right. So it's kind of unanimous straw vote in that respect, Mr. Motivaran. So let's.
No, we're good. We're good with that.
Good. Okay. Let's go with that. And Mr. Gardner, listen, continue the good work on your end. We certainly appreciate it. But again, we want to make this document again something that we can be very proud of, and that we will be very proud of it. And hopefully, other municipalities and communities throughout New York State can utilize this when they move forward in the future. So let's hold this for 2 weeks. Ms. Maiku, put it back out in 2 weeks, please. And
Mr. Kosher, I do have to one more thing though. In terms of the making sure, I just want to make sure that we're not saying that the guidelines for the specs and the policy is that we have to wait on that in terms of as we're releasing bids that those individuals still have to meet those guidelines in terms of hiring an MWBE. Are we saying that if we don't pass, this doesn't move forward, which I'm not suggesting it does, but I want to just be clear, are we saying that this does not move forward, that we will not be able to hold contractors to those requirements?
Mr. Colden or Richard, I know Rich is on here too. And either of you two want to comment on that? Mr. Colden or Richard, are you still there?
We try to make sure that every directive from the council has been included in language we put forth. So if there's a requirement that there's an MWBE, we adhere to that.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure what that means if there's a requirement though, if this is MWBE.
Well, the city has a stated goal of what percentage of MWBE vendors must be used in each of our contracts. So we state that in the bid requirements.
Right. But we stated, but what's our recourse if, they don't do it? I mean, because let's just be frank that in times past, we have not met those stated goals. So what are we doing now that says, okay, you didn't meet that goal? Or do we just write it in there? You absolutely have to, and we'll supply you with a list of people. I just want to make sure that those things are in place as we move forward through this as well.
I think that falls mostly to Ron to help us with that bit of information, and also then to Andrew to make sure that if there isn't compliance, that we have some teeth in the requirements, so that there's some penalty to those contractors that don't meet the requirement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Can I add in here?
New piece that we have forward too. There was a penalty I was speaking about, so that's in there.
Yeah. Can I insert here? Here's why we're having the conversation, because currently that is here, and I do concur and agree wholeheartedly with taking our time to through it, and I remind everyone that this document that you see in real estate, this is from the 80s, 1980 something, and that's how long since this matter has been addressed. And I think it is very, very important that we do seriously take a look at that and do the best we can. But I think they're certainly moving in the right direction. I'm pretty proud of where we are.
Yeah, and as Ron said, that's Ms. Marion, that's in his piece there, section 2.7. He's got it in there. If the contractor fails to achieve the state goals, the contractor shall pay. So 2.7. And Mr. Gardner pointed that out earlier this evening.
Which is my point exactly. We're not going to move this forward at this moment. We're still going to do a lot of review. It needs to go to Mr. Colden. That's my point. I understand that it's in here. I just want to make sure that as we're letting contracts, because this is not going to be ready, and as the contracts go out, will we still be able to have that to put in the teeth to ensure that we're meeting our goals and that they're making a good faith effort and that we're holding them to it.
Yep, 100%.
That's my concern.
Was that you, Mr. McLaren, speaking? Who was standing in there?
No, I'm okay. I mean, there was no rush. It's just that we want to make sure that we get it to the council. We move forward with this. We don't mind hold for another 2 weeks to get Mr. Holding to fine tune this, and we'll then bring it back and call for public hearing at that point in time.
All right, very good, sir. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else to come before this committee?
Motion to adjourn. The first item on the agenda is discussion to do electronic bids through BidNet with Mr. McElravy-Ackert.
Good evening, Mayor. Obviously, with everything that's been going on with the COVID-19, there is a pressing need to be able to receive bids. But in our traditional method of doing that, bids would be hand delivered or courier delivered or mail delivered to the clerk's office, at which point they would be time and date stamped. And then roughly a half an hour after that, we would open the bids publicly with a number of individuals in the room, mostly interested vendors, along with city staff, would record the information that was in the bids and then move forward at that point. Under Governor Cuomo's recent executive orders, we do have the ability to make those bid openings done by web, but also in conjunction with that, we need the ability to receive our bids through electronic methods versus physically receiving them. So while there does remain an element of being able to receive bids by mail, we would like to amend our purchasing policy so that we can heretofore receive our bids electronically. And those bids would be held by BidNet until such time as the deadline passed, at which point they would release the file to us and the bids would be opened electronically via WebEx so that all interested parties could see them and still be a party to that process. So what we're asking tonight is that the council consider amending our bid policy to allow us to accept electronic bids and open them in WebEx. We would also open at the same time any physical bids that were received so that all would be on a level playing field.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Penn,
Yep, go ahead, Ms. Zaluski-Wazunis.
we're already set up for this. The WebEx seems to be moving, using great technology here. So I think we need to move this forward in an expeditious manner so that we can continue to have the city's work done. So I'd like to make a motion that we accept this.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 All right, next on the agenda is Mr. Gardner with the master subscription license agreement with LCP Tracker.
Okay, again, thank you. In an effort to achieve efficiently and effectively the policies that we're putting forward as it relates to not only Section 3 and the economic development components, but also the opportunity for enhancement and opportunity for our constituents. I'm requesting this software to help me effectively manage and handle the tasks stated in these two policies. So what LCP Tracker, this database, is going to do is essentially helping us manage the workforce portion of and all the certified payroll. So any contract that we have within the city, all vendors will now be required to input all of their certified payroll into this one system. And we're currently using something similar on the state level through Relations, but that's only because of that one contract. But I'm trying to get something consistent throughout all of our platforms that we're working with so that all of our certified payrolls come in. That way we can have control in terms of who's in compliance and have the ability to audit and manage and basically make sure that we as a city stay in compliance with the requirements as we're working with these state and federal funds. And then there's also a second component, that's another additional module that goes with this as it relates to workforce development. And that tool effectively help us manage the workflow of, as we have clients coming into our workforce training program, and we'll be able to monitor and track and bridge the access to resources on a broad spectrum of allocations across the region, really. So we'll be able to track and assist and make sure that we have success of our program as we move forward. We'll be able to have the type of data to know exactly who we're assisting, where the needs are, how can we get the resources to them that they need. And it's just a mechanism for us to have the tools and the resources necessary to effectively execute these policies that we're moving forward.
Mr. Gardner, I didn't see in the packet that we received, unless it was updated late, how much does this software package cost?
It's two parts. The first one, I think, is like around $8,400, and I think the module, the workforce development module, is like another $8,300. And I propose to use the funding from my CDBG allocation to support this.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Palmeni, I do have one, sir.
Go ahead, Mr. Koger.
Yeah, thank you. On page 57, our page 57, their page, what is it here? I don't even know what it is on their page. Page 11. Section 5 there, where it says the change orders that increase the construction capacity. It says such construction cost increases exceeds 25%. How the increase must be updated. Bolt Johns, I just caught this just a while ago, but again, it's on their page 11, our page 57, John. If you're looking for it, our page 57. You go to that. And then, yep, one more. And there you go, section 5. Oh, right there. Roman numeral 5. Right there. It says about the cost increase exceeding 25%. Is that the number, John, that we use? Either, John, I thought we just changed that. And even Mr. Gardner, I think that, because that's in there, is that something that we put in there, or is that something that this company is using on their own? And can we change that amount?
No, that's something with the company as it relates to subscription and the volume of the contract value that we're managing through the system. And if it's over, that amount, so it's nothing to do with the change orders that you're currently discussing.
Well, just it says change orders right there. Change orders.
Right.
Can you comment, either John or John? Am I right or wrong? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this. I don't know. I just was wondering about that 25%.
I think it's just coincidence that we purchase policy that we have. We set aside 25% for change orders, And this agreement here from this company, LC Tracker, is carrying the same, or their agreement.
It is the same. Okay, that's why I want to make sure it was 25%. Wasn't sure what our number was. But you're saying it's 25, so then that's very good then. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Palomini, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Gardner, you just stated that you have going to take this from the CDGB money, and my concern here is that we need to tighten our belts right now and not really spend additional funds. I realize this would be extremely beneficial, but I would ask that we wait and do this with the federal money that's coming through that Kristen spoke about earlier. This seems to fit right up into that care money, so that would be my recommendation.
Mr. Palomini?
I'll just let, I'm sorry, is that Ms. Porterfield?
It is, whenever you're ready.
Go ahead.
All right. So I actually think that considering, all that Mr. Gardner is a one-person department, basically, and all the work that we can clearly see that he's doing, this would help him tremendously. And if it's within the budget and if he's already found it in his budgeting, I think that it's something actually would be more beneficial to do, because as we move forward and we're doing more workforce development and there's more people doing contracts, this will allow him to get a lot more work done as a single person office. Although I do know, let me just be clear, I know that he gets a lot of support from other staff, but I think it would to utilize this piece of technology to help him to be able to streamline things is a good thing to have on the front end, as opposed to waiting until we get the other money, which we're not exactly sure when that's going to be, and to help him be able to do his job much more effectively. So I don't suggest that we wait on this. I suggest that the funding is there and he's able to take it out of the current funding that he has, that we do that to enable him to do his job more efficiently. Especially if we're going to be talking about changes in staffing, that we want to make sure that the staff the staff that's there has the ability to do their job extremely well. So I would suggest that we move forward and not wait until we get additional funding.
I think there's some confusion here. Mr. Gardner, hopefully you can clear us up. So is this money coming out of budget or out of CDBG funds?
CDBG fund.
Okay, so it's not out of the city budget.
No.
Okay.
A second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is the Camp Avenue sidewalks with Mr. Wallen.
Hello, I am here now.
Has left the meeting.
So,
Mr. Palomini, just before Mr. Walling proceed, is it mind you can just give a recap as to why we have this on the agenda and discussion?
Yeah, it was something came over to earphones that somebody left the meeting, so it was a delay.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Please.
Yep. So we received communications about the Camp Avenue. And a while back, it was either the last meeting or the meeting before, we moved to rebid the Camp Avenue sidewalks. At the time, we moved forward to this. And then just recently, we received communication that the contractor would charge $250,000 more for other parts of the same bid that was released for other parts not related to the Camp Avenue. And so that's one of the reasons, major reason we're bringing this forward. And I'll start off, first of all, given that we talked about this at the meeting, why weren't we given this information at that time so we could vote accordingly and move properly in a good manner?
okay, so I will pick up that. So what we have is on the 23rd is when the committee meeting met. It was our first committee meeting in this format, in this virtual format. We discussed the camp, and it was decided that we would rebid and go literature that we had just talked about. When that was decided on, I spoke with both the mayor and Mr. Colden about how to proceed, and we decided to wait until the 30th when the council meeting and decision was official. When the talk was official, or I don't even know if there was actually an item on it, that might be part of the issue, but I waited till the 30th. The week after the 30th, I brought this to our contractor, and I stated that we will not be moving forward with the Camp Avenue due to the council's actions. They came back and said to me, well, if we're not moving forward with the camp, that's approximately 1/3 of the total contract value, as well as over 50% of the curb and sidewalk under the contract. And if we were going to remove over 50% of those two items, that they would like to renegotiate with the city those costs, because now instead of being a bulk item, it would be more of a handwork select item. So I asked them to provide me with some numbers to understand the total impact. They provided me those numbers 1 week later. They used a process known by the DOT and used by the DOT where you compare with state numbers. I took that information and I brought it to Mr. Colden and the mayor for discussion. And the topic that came out of that was that it was premature to have these negotiation talks with the contractor, as the action that the council took at that time was not official, and therefore the contract was not changed. So it was recommended that I get all of my information together, distribute it to the council, and ask for some type of official action that would then affect the contract in an official way, which would be communicated officially to the contractor, and then we would take it from there with negotiations. So when I say negotiate as well, there really hasn't been anything. It's been more of conversation. I have not gone back with them to talk about their numbers. It was just a preliminary conversation, which I used to get a starting point to have this conversation with both the corporation council, the mayor, and now yourself. So if anyone has any other comments, Andrew or the mayor, I would welcome them, but that is why we are here today. We're here today for an official action on the contract and less of a discussion.
So where is it in the contract that calls for this change in pricing and so forth? Because I know I looked through it, several others have looked through it. We didn't see anything, and would really like to know where this is.
Mr. Palmetti?
That Miss Patrick?
I also just wanted to say in the contract, and I could totally be misinterpreting this, but in section, I think it was 29, it looks like the city would not have to have any penalty or expense if the funds weren't appropriated by the council. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but it was the only place I could find in the contract that seemed to allude to something of this nature.
Yeah, and this was discussed with Andrew. Right now, we do have some stipulations in there that state that we can add or remove quantities. However, the contractor's arguing that it's a fundamental change. I think they're getting a little confused with city being a municipality and the state being a municipality. But I've been really working with Andrew on that. So, Andrew, do you have anything to weigh in with regards to the contract itself?
Regarding the contract itself, I mean, the council did obviously pass a resolution authorizing this contract, the mayor to enter into this contract, which he did. Part of the contract, as Chris mentioned, relates to the camp, paving and sidewalks. There is a clause in the contract which allows Chris as engineer to make modifications to quantities used. With regard to section 29, the funds have been appropriated. As of right now, this contract has been funded. Obviously, with everything going on related to COVID and any uncertainties related to, budget and economics related to the pandemic, that's really a question for the council and I think the mayor to look at in terms of moving forward with whatever is remaining here. But in terms of, as I said, in terms of the engineer's ability to make changes, the engineer can make changes to quantities under the contract, and the price for the remaining quantities have to be the same. That's what the contract states.
Mr. Palomeni?
Go ahead, Ms. Peraza.
Considering the fiscal circumstances we're in now and the fact that the city has to pay this money upfront and then hold paper on it for 10 years, I do not think we should be moving forward with this project at this time.
Mr. Palomini?
Mr. Mudavaren.
A couple questions for Mr. Wallian. When we approved this contract back last year, I think it was December, we approved this for paving several streets. Why is this paving contract linked to the camp sidewalk program that we had not approved funding for?
So back when we were talking about this program, we wanted to see how many options that we could have to do a program such as this. So what it was decided on, and maybe it wasn't an official decision, but maybe it was just conversation, was that we had two programs. We had an Ardsley Road program and we had a camp. And the thought was to bid the programs in two unique ways to try to determine if the pricing differences were noticeable. So with Ardsley Road being a straight project with regards to no curb, no pavement, only concrete, we bid that project separately as a sidewalk only project. That project, as you know, was awarded with Callanan. As DeCamp is more of a complete streets project, and typically in the past had been done under paving programs and not done separately, to my knowledge. It was usually put into paving programs. And at the time, some of those streets were actually the bulk of the paving program. It was decided, since we had a smaller fall contract, that we would combine the two to see what our pricing would be in comparison, to see if we got a better deal or if we got more bids or less. The numbers that we got were similar. If you were to compare the two, I believe that they differed by a few dollars per square foot. One was, at 1.80, one might have been 83, somewhere in that range. So it was, decided that the costs do not seem to be too different, and we move forward. In retrospect, we can always do these things separate, but at the time, that was the thought, was that by bundling, we would get the best value. So we decided to bundle certain projects. And since the camp had paving, as the street is not only getting curbs and sidewalks, but being paved, that was the thought. Also, this project, the Louisi one, was a smaller project. It was a small paving project, we called it, to use some of the leftover money that we had from that year. So we thought it was a good pilot program to try. So we have the two sets of data. So that's why this particular Camp Avenue was put into this program.
Follow-up question, is it one of the reasons why the drawing spec is in this backup? And just another question too on that. Why did we provide the spec drawings to this subcontractor in the paving contract, knowing the fact that we didn't approve the sidewalk program for the camp? Why were they allowed the preview of this document?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the preview of what document?
The backup document for the camp sidewalk program, the spec.
John, I still don't understand. We didn't provide them with anything ahead of time.
It's in the backup here that is presented to us with regards to the paving contract.
Okay, I guess
the decamp frontage, the driveway, the footage, and all the documents that the specs associated with the camp sidewalk.
Why do we provide them with special?
Why was that presented? Yes, why is that part of the paving for this contractor?
That was just, if you're talking about our bid specs.
Who made this decision?
Who made what decision, John?
The decision with the sidewalk and the paving.
Well, I believe we all made the decision.
When you say we, council and engineering?
Well, engineering can only put the things together based on the direction that I received. I will stick by that. I received direction that we wanted to put together paving contracts that would try to give us the best value. And so, like I said, we bundled this together to try to get the best value for the residents of the camp, as well as we separated one, Ardsley, to try to get smaller contractors that would not be eligible if we included paving. So both contracts regarding sidewalk assessment were done specifically tailored to the project that they were.
Well, I will say I rewatched the September 16th committee meeting, and I didn't see anything of this nature unless I'm misunderstanding something. And quite frankly, this is very problematic and troubling in the sense of, the camp was made, residents of the camp were made certain assurances. None of those were upheld. They're concerned about the paving of the road, which I think is very legitimate. The sidewalk program has been completely bungled from the engineering's office from the get-go, despite assurances of, yes, these numbers are correct, yes, and turns out, no, they're not. And we had issue with Ardsley, now we have issue with the camp. I'd really like to know when there's going to be some accountability here, because we made assurances to residents of both streets, and there were communications that were said that we're going to go out, and this was part of a dictate's not the right word, but an ask of the engineering department to do, and it wasn't done. So this whole thing is completely mismanaged, and it's ridiculous. And now you're coming back with, they want $250,000 more. Sorry, that's not in the contract. It was screwed up from the engineering department, and there needs to be some accountability here.
Well, John, I will tell you that I find your language completely offensive to me. I think that you're completely out of line, and I will continue to do my job exactly how I've been doing it and bringing things to the council. And I will bring you all the information as I have been doing. And then you can continue to approve the information that I bring you, and then tell me that you didn't see the information that I brought you.
Well, it's not just me that didn't see it, Mr. Wallen. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry. But the reality is reality. We were given a spreadsheet with numbers, told multiple times these numbers are correct. Turns out they weren't. Then we move forward, and continuously there's this issue after issue. And that's just facts. So are there any other comments or questions from my colleagues on the council?
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in also, Mr. Mudavaren. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to weigh in here. Thank you. I would like to weigh in here. I'm sorry, as well. And I think that I certainly am not laying this certainly at the feet of engineering entirely, because I think there were those of us on the council who felt that this really needed to have some more review before we moved forward. And Mr. Palomini, if I can be frank, you really, really did push to have this done. So I don't think I think that more time should have been taken. Had we taken more time, we probably would not be where we are today. if others' voices at the table were heard. So I have to say that Mr. Wallen, who I think does a great job of what he's done and always has, everything lays at his doorstep. I'm going to have to disagree with that and think, as a council, I'm a member of the council, so I have to own it as well, even though my vote was no. I think the council also has some responsibility here because it was something that really, really wanted to be pushed forward and get done in a certain time frame. And had we taken the time to look and really dive deep into those documents, because I don't think that was done, frankly, we would have maybe this would have been something that we would have discovered and had more discussion about. So we are where we are. I'm not saying that it wasn't. It's an excellent idea, and as I said before, the implementation, did leave something to be desired. But I don't think that it was entirely something that the engineering department fell short on. And so as we, now we have people on DeCamp Avenue, and I think we're all getting their emails or phone calls to saying, hey, we need this paving program because our streets are unlevel, people can't go down in their wheelchairs, et cetera. So now we're in a position where I don't know how we do this, but we really need to do something to move forward because we basically made a commitment to individuals, our residents, that we're going to do this. And so how we do it, I think is carefully, first of all, but, that we try to figure out a way to move forward. And I understand Ms. Peraso's point about, the city having to hold paper. So we have to, it's going to be a delicate balancing act, but I think it's something we need to move forward on. And I, again, will say that I don't think responsibility of this entirely belongs to the engineering department.
Well, when we were given numbers that were incorrect from the get-go, and despite assurances that they were correct, when communication was given to communicate with residents and it wasn't done, certainly is 100% engineering? No, but there's a good chunk right there that just wasn't done. And let's move forward with the some of the paving stuff that's part of the capital budget anyway. But I think Mr. Mudavarian had a comment.
Yes,
I could also comment when the chair president's over.
Yes, when Mr. Mudavarian's done.
Yeah. This is just a follow-up to Mr. Wallen. Mr. Wallen, you had sent us an email back a couple of weeks ago explaining the rationale behind the moving power of this sidewalk program and linking it with the paving program. The question is, and you mentioned in your email that the contractor went ahead and purchased material and they have store materials. Did they notify you prior to make this purchase that they're going to go ahead and purchase material for the sidewalk program, knowing the fact that we didn't approve funding for the sidewalk program?
John, I think you misunderstood. I will just jump in. I think you misunderstood the materials. Like I said, 50%, a little over 50% of the curb was for DeCamp. So that they've put in, let's say the remaining 50%, they've put in 30% of it. So to the contractor, what they're saying is that we're changing the pricing and the quantities 6 months in, 7 months into the contract, where they now are completely exposed. So we have not stopped the contractor. The contractor is working. They're actually on union right now. Well, not right now, but they're on union. They're putting in curbing. They're putting in materials, not DeCamp materials, but other materials, the other 50%. And what they're stating is that, they are now have an exposure because we reduced the quantity so much. If they aren't compensated additionally, and this is their discussion, this is something that I'm being a vessel here to tell you, is that they're saying that they have quite a bit of exposure because we're not doing this ahead of time where they can say, okay, you know what, back out of this contract. Now they're saying, well, we've already got the other 50% in, and that's the 50% we wanted to renegotiate. So they do not have, just so you're aware, they do not have 4,000 feet of curb lined somewhere for DeCamp or a concrete. This is the other 3,000 feet that they put in a Becker, Union, where else? Steuben, all the other streets that we've done, because they have to put in curb every time we do ADA improvements on a ramp. So while it doesn't look like a lot, it does add up to quite a bit. But once again, DeCamp was still over 50% of the curb for this particular contract.
Mr. Parliament, if you mind, I would like to direct
Go
a
ahead,
question to Mr. Colden. Mr. Colden, what is in our position right now in terms of council? What can we do legally to pass a binding resolution to pull the funding or pull work, the sidewalk program? And we have a binding resolution. Is that something that we can do as a council?
As you know, the council's already authorized this contract for the full amount, including all of the specs that Mr. Wallen already brought up. In terms of, I mean, the funds have already been committed for this. As I mentioned, I believe it was Ms. Peraza brought up the fact that, you know, there are fiscal challenges going on right now due to the pandemic. You know, monies that maybe should have been allocated somewhere else or it should not be allocated now or spent now. Mr. Wallen does have the ability to control the quantities used for the contract. That is where I would, you know, in terms of what the council can legally do. I would say that, you know, a directive, if, you know, the council can certainly, you know, pass a resolution giving a directive related to removing that part of the sidewalk from the DeCamp, from this contract for DeCamp. The council can certainly pass a resolution to give a directive if the council was inclined to do that. Or certainly the council can, I believe the funds have already been committed. Is that right, Mr. Wallen?
Well, all funds have been contract, correct?
Right. So I don't know if it would be not in the council's interest to all of a sudden remove funding. It would not be in the city's interest. But as I said, to give a directive not to do DeCamp, as I said, Mr. Wallen does have flexibility within the contract. If that's what the council chooses to do.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Motiver, and then.
No, I was going to defer to you now.
Oh, okay. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Again, you know, this has been more complicated than I think anybody thought initially. And the initial proposal actually went back to Raymond Street, which petitioned, and the council didn't do anything on that initially or for any time. In the fundamental thing is you have to remember most of the streets where we have sidewalks and curbs were built under this program, where they were put in with a special assessment going to the homeowner. These two streets move forward based on petitions from the residents. And I think everybody, including myself, members of the council, and you can speak for yourselves, but and the homeowners and the staff, hope that the price point on these projects would come in lower. They didn't. We were seeing that across the board in construction projects. Just our estimates over the past few years that had been fairly good. We're going out to bid. We were seeing the numbers come in dramatically higher, reflected the economic activity that is happening in the region and in the city. Having said that, I think it's still a good program. It allows us to get the sidewalks in, allows the homeowners to get the work done. It's still probably a better price point than they could do individually. Worked it out on Ardsley, DeCamp. I would still recommend the council move this forward in some manner to complete the work. It's what are you going to have the homeowners pay? That money has already been bonded. If we don't do this, the city's just going to have to, it'll go back on a payment schedule going back. This allows us to get the homeowners to pay some amount back. It may not be the 100% that we've represented it to be. Is it 50 cents on the dollar? Is it 75 cents on the dollar? I'm not sure, but again, the council's passed a resolution authorizing it. We signed a contract for the contractor to move ahead. It hasn't moved at the price points we would have liked. And it is a reflection, I think, in the market where the prices are just higher, even though the underlying concept and goals are worthy and really are fundamentally correct. It's just what the dollar point people are going to have to pay, and it's again the prerogative of the council to determine some of those. But I would recommend that somehow you move this forward, let the work be done, come up with some price point that we charge the residents something that they think is fair. They might not think it's as low as they want. It's not going to be as high as what the council had hoped originally, but it'll serve the long-term needs of the neighborhood and the progress within the city.
Ms. Patrick.
I think.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Palomeni. I guess I want to ask back to the contract. And again, this was all done, I think, back in September, right? When I read the contract again, it does say that the work was going to be fully completed by November of 2019. I don't think that happened. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. So, in fact, I'm just not understanding. We signed this contract, right? I mean, I think you guys voted on this contract and signed it in November, but the work wasn't completed. So what's our strategy there in terms of, they're coming back to us saying they want more money, but they haven't actually done what we initially agreed them to do? Or am I misunderstanding this contract? Andrew or Mr. Colden or Mr. Wallen?
Well, it's my understanding they're willing to live up to the contract. If we take DeCamp Avenue out, they're going to look for a price adjustment because they're not going to get some quantity discount or utilization of their labor at the same rate that they would have under a full contract.
Yeah, and in regards to those dates, that probably was a little bit of I'm not going to say a misprint. However, there were certain streets that we really needed to get done by November 2019. However, it was the understanding that DeCamp, and I have several emails with residents, and residents were really pushing to have it done. But with September award, and you know how it works, September award, we get on board in October, supplies and materials come in. What we were starting, we would open up a hornet's nest and not be able to complete it in an adequate fashion by winter. So I communicated with the neighborhood about pushing it off to the spring to make sure that we didn't have open excavations and things like that. I actually personally wrote emails and letters to specifically on the street that was featured in the paper with the disability. We offered to pave some of the sidewalks to the park on an intern basis so that she could get there. She stated that she didn't need that type of assistance at the time and was just looking forward to the project starting in the spring. That's not to bait you, that's just to tell you about the emails and to make sure I was communicating with the residents. So we did get some of the work done. However, really, the camp was always a spring project because of the extent of it. It's a very large project.
Okay. May I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
In terms of the sidewalk piece of it, I mean, I think that we've been getting some emails that seem to indicate that perhaps some of the folks that signed on to the original agreement or petition might not want to do this anymore. Is again, as a new person since January, what's the validity of that? How do we get around? I mean, they signed on at first, but then with all these issues, they seem to be changing their minds? To them, or what's the process here?
Mr. Colden?
Certainly we can kind of replicate what we did with Ardsley in terms of going back to them, making sure they're still on board. Obviously, I think part of this is a policy question, and not so much a legal question. My understanding is, and Mr. Wallen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when they signed on to the petition, we didn't actually know what the exact number would be. It was a general sense of, where we thought it was going to be. So that, still holds true. They signed on, as I said, with my understanding that they didn't know exactly what that number would be. Certainly go back to them if the council is going to, move forward. Obviously, as I said, we do have a signed contract with Louise here. The concern obviously is, from a policy standpoint, wanting to, keep a good relationship with our contractors.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is, I don't know about all the communications that have happened. I don't think that they've originated out of my office. So I don't know the last time they reached out to the homeowners to see who's on board and who's not on board. Obviously, as I said, though, with Ardsley, we did it a particular way to, I think, accommodate, the thought that people had, that the homeowners had in terms of pricing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Palomini?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I sat around that table and I voted no against this legislation because I said at the time that I felt like it was half-baked. I still feel like it was half-baked. I don't think there was a procedural timeline put in place in this legislation. There's also no provision in this legislation for a rebirth clause for these people on decamp. So that makes me nervous. It was one of the things that concerned me from the get-go, including making sure we had the highest number of people required to sign on. But I would be remiss if I didn't speak up at this time to say that I want nothing to do with the finger pointing and the public lashing of what happened during this meeting. It is indefensible. Chris Wallen does a great job and he has my 100% support. Are we all perfect? No, we're not perfect. But for the council to try to point fingers at Chris for legislation that wasn't well thought out or thorough when he was doing his very best to do his job, I think is just disgraceful. And I want that said publicly.
Anyone else?
Mr.
Mr. Mudavaren?
Yeah, I'm just gonna refer back to Mr. Colden. If we decide not to move forward with the camp sidewalk program, what is our responsibility as a council to move a resolution to make this a binding via resolution that we are not going to fund this program until we rebid it and we get everything in order before we proceed?
As I said, the contract's already been signed. The funding's already been has already been established for this contract. And as I said, part of this contract is the sidewalks for DeCamp. I believe Ms. Perazzo earlier, mentioned, as I said, the fiscal impact of, coronavirus. Obviously, paving is something that obviously is important, and so are sidewalks. I can't tell the council there's one particular way that it move forward. As I mentioned, though, certainly the council can pass a resolution. Meeting.
Mr. Palomini, what I would like to put to the council is that we move a resolution to defund the camp and sidewalk program until we can get all the specs, get all the details, and get everything working properly. We have learned our lesson with Ardsley, and we do not want to go down this road with the camp. We want to get everybody to buy into it, all the homeowners, everybody, and we want to make sure that we do the right thing. And at this point in time, when the city in financial stress right now too, I mean, there's an opportunity for us to hold these things in.
So I just I want to ask first of all ask a question. In terms of the camp, have we told residents what their expected costs would be? Have we given them that information?
No.
No, not at all.
No,
Okay.
and that was some of the communication that was hopefully supposed to be going out, but there was some issue with various vendors, alternatives that were being looked at, and they did get the idea of what their costs were going to be based on the Ardsley project.
So, I don't think this is the time to really discuss why it didn't happen, but I am curious to find out why that didn't happen. So, and in terms of the Ardsley project, and they bid the project, this contractor, and I know it came in way over, and part of it was because there were trees that need to be excavated and all of that. And I guess I'm just really wondering, how is it that when the contractor was looking at that project, that wasn't something that was clear to them, that, that there's these trees that need to come out, and so I guess that really confuses me a little bit in terms of why they didn't know that, and therefore say this is going to cost more before they. Let me just say this, that the bid should have been higher. I'm not sure I understand why that didn't happen. And as we look at the camp, would there be similar concerns in terms of the trees? I mean, I know where both streets are, but in terms of, what it would look like to pave it, I have no idea. Would those kind of concerns, Mr. Wallen, still be there as well with the camp?
With the camp, I would not think that there will be many tree issues. There aren't a lot of trees like on Ardsley. They're not as old, not as large. Would there be cost increases? I would have to say most likely. I haven't worked on many projects that we are less. It is a $468,000 project. So even if you were to say that the project had 10% overruns, you're still just shy of $50,000, which it's a lot of money, but it's 10%. On most construction jobs, that would be okay. One of the things that we're learning about is the cost of handwork and estimating. Each driveway is a little bit more. We use mass production, I guess would be a word. And when you get into handwork, let's go up. So possibly, but also this is a larger contract with more items in it, whereas there weren't a lot of flexibilities and items in the cost. But I can't figure and say.
And we also haven't gotten a cost. So does it make more sense at this point in time, since we've already signed a contract, to figure out exactly what it's going to cost the resident and then go back to them with that before so we just keep our commitment based on the fact that the residents are comfortable with what they're paying. If the residents are, then that becomes a very different conversation. But doing all of that legwork ahead of time. I beg your pardon?
I think that's Mr. Kosher trying to get into the, he lost his microphone.
It is, Jan. I'm back, and I lost my connection, so go ahead. I'm listening. Go ahead.
Okay. So would it be more worthwhile for us to make sure that we know everything that needs to be done, the cost as close to possible, speak to the residents, let them know what their cost is going to be before we say, let's just pull the money back and rebid it. And I know initially I thought we should rebid it, but given all this additional information about us having signed a contract and the idea that there may be additional funding that we would need to come up with, and I know that we wouldn't have to necessarily, because our the contract says that we can change the quantities, but keeping in, trying to keep a good relationship with all of our contractors. And let's say, given the fact that everything wasn't as well thought out as we moved forward, that we try to kind of stay with the contract, but first of all, make sure everyone understands exactly what the costs are going to be, And again, our residents say, yes, I'm comfortable with this cost, because residents are coming back to us and saying, we do want our sidewalks done. But the question is, at what cost? So we present with them the cost of what it's going to be, and do they then agree to that?
Mr. Paul Manning, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Kosher.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I apologize. My laptop, believe it or not, powered down. I went out of time. I didn't think we were going to last 2 hours here. So anyway, I appreciate everybody's comments and understand what's happening here, and to Chris Wallen, John Paul Manning, and the rest of our council. But I think what we might end up having to do here, again, for discussion, if we're looking at a possibility of the costing the city an extra $250,000, I would almost like to propose that we look back to what we did with the Ardsley piece. If we do the 40-foot sidewalk at the $2,700, let those residents be liable for the $2,700 of the cost of a 40-foot sidewalk. And then unfortunately or fortunately, the city would have to make up that difference in cost through our capital project funding that hopefully we would still have some left over to do this. Again, like I said, I think Ardsley cost us $115,000. Maybe somebody can correct me on that, but if we're looking at the two lesser of evils, and again, the camp residents are certainly looking forward to doing this, and I would assure you that they would be willing to pay the price that we had come out originally with an estimate. And again, let's remember that was the word that was on that petition, is an estimate. But again, when these numbers came out, they were all well over $4,000 per sidewalk for many of those residents. So that would be one of the suggestions I would like to put forward to the council, again, to as the mayor said, to move forward with the project, because it is a great project. It'll really do well for the camp residents who are looking forward to this. And to John Palmetti's point too, with the lack of notification, I spoke to several of those residents on the camp, and Mr. Mayor, to your office as well, none of those residents were even notified since December. Even when the bid came out, when we signed this contract, when that bid came out and we, the council, approved it, not a single correspondence or a piece of information was given to any of those residents on DeCamp as far as what their assessment would be or what their cost would be. And I think that's a piece we have.
I was doing notifications, it's got to look.
I understand, and that's Gary, and that's
I'll deal with
Mr. Mayor. I agree. Listen, I'm not, and again, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. And somebody mentioned that, but these are the things we have to just. It's not going to be the council, so I guess, and I don't want to say the word, but we assumed, and that certainly is not the right word we should have used here. That is the pieces that we're missing, that notification, the constant communication with these residents. Because again, I truly believe they want to move forward with the project. If we can get to that $2,700 mark that we agreed to with Ardsley, move forward on that and then make up the difference through our capital fund balance, which I know we do have to make up the cost difference for DeCamp. And again, really when we move forward, and I really want to move forward on this project somewhere down the road, and not obviously in 2020 because of everything that's happening here. But I really, truly believe it's going to be something that we should be doing down the road and continue it.
Luigi's is looking for that we would maybe move forward with that.
As I'm looking at the original bid from DeCamp, the total cost to residents was estimated to be $165,000.
All right, then it's definitely less than
that would get the square foot. Yeah, but that comes to the square foot of 1972. It comes to 83.55. Mr. Kosher's amount for 40 feet, $2,700 is $67.50. So,
but
I think Mr. Fry stated it's not a square foot; it's a linear foot.
Yeah, we need to get that straight.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. I got.
Okay. So I don't know that we could. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Palomini.
Go ahead, Ms.
I don't know that we could say we can do the same as Ardsley as we're going and do the same on DeCamp because, as Mr. Wallen pointed out, they're two very different streets. So I don't know that we just go with that. I think we really need to be very clear on what it's going to cost of the camp and what the cost is going to be to residents as we move forward, and not just try to make it a cookie cutter of what we did on Ardsley, which didn't turn out well. So I think that we really need to make sure that we're what the cost is going to be, what the cost is going to be to residents, and that residents receive that information, and that the residents are in agreement to that, as opposed to just trying to move ahead based on trying to fix our missteps on Ardsley and then maybe fit it at the camp. I think we really have to make sure that we do the process. Work to do, but if we do all that homework, I mean, if we can move ahead with that, I just think that it would make sense to get it done in 2020, provided again that we get the correct numbers of what it's going to cost the city and the correct numbers of what it's going to cost the residents, and they are very clear on that and in agreement with it. I think Ms. Patrick brought up that some people wanted to now back out of that, and Mr. Colden said we would have to then revisit those individuals. So I think those things need to take place before we can really move forward. But I'm supporting that if we find this contract, we figure out a way to get it done, learn from our mistakes, but try to do the best job that we can for our residents. And since we already have this contract signed, and hopefully get it done.
Well, we already know the cost for the camp residents, as is the current contract. So I think Mr. Ferrari just gave that number. So we know that we can do as we did with charging Ardsley with the camp if we wanted to, and then say to the residents, this is what your charge would be, and give them the opportunity to communicate with us. That's largely what I was thinking. I didn't very well state that, but that's, I think, Ferrari's numbers, but maybe we can get an email from him in the next day or two with exact figures, and then a communication could be sent out to the camp if the council agrees to charge the same price as Ardsley, and then figure this out once and for all, how we get the camp done.
I have to say, I'm not, I still can't be in agreement with just charging the same price as Ardsley. I think we need to be really specific that what it's really going to cost for the camp if they're two different streets.
We already have those costs. Mr. Ferrari, could you repeat that?
No, I'd like to see it in writing, and I did hear him, but I would like to see that in writing.
Sure. Yeah, and I asked him to send an email.
Okay.
From engineering with the total cost, city share, and then cost to the residents. Total frontage is 1,972 linear feet. And
Can I just, Mr. Palmetti?
Go ahead.
I just want to say, and I know this is the caboose coming up here at the end of the train, but I think moving forward that, sorry, I muted myself again by accident. If it's possible for us to, and for engineering, I mean, to come up with a price that if we move forward with this program on other streets, that rather than trying to do a different price street by street, that we come up with some average cost or some understanding of what our investment is for future sidewalks on other streets. That's just a suggestion. But I also am concerned that, I mean, I see going forward with this, I understand that, but I am concerned about that $250,000, and I'm hoping that perhaps in reopening negotiations that will go away. That's all I wanted to say.
Mr. Pauline, I don't think we usually start discussion where the city is going to be taking a portion. And what we have seen, Ardsley, that the city is picking up a share. And now we're going into the camp and the city is going to pick up another share. That was not initially discussed, and we never agreed for that. We only agreed to pick up the share because of what happened at Ardsley and stuff. So why are we proceeding to continue to push this along where the homeowner, we should have put the program out there, we communicate costs to the homeowner. If they agreed, we proceed. We're ending up now where we are doing sidewalks programs, and we are picking up, when I say we, the city is picking up a portion of the tab, the homeowner is picking up a portion of the tab, taxpayers' money all along this way for that. I don't think it's the right thing that we are doing right at this point in time, and I think we need to put a hold and analyze this and get everything in order before we proceed. We cannot continue.
So, Mr. Muller-Baron, if I may ask, if I can just ask this question, are you saying that that with this project, the city would still have to pick up some of it based on the cost that Mr. Ferrari is going to send to us, that we're still going to have a level of ability, that it's not going to be the way this was initially presented, that it would all be the cost of the homeowner? Because my understanding is the reason it went so far over with Ardsley is because of the trees, but Mr. Wallen is saying that is not the case here. So I'm not sure why the thought is, or the indication is, that the city is going to have to pick up a portion of this.
Has left the meeting.
Ms. Porterfield, I believe there is a miscommunication in a couple of these things, which is Ardsley Road was awarded somewhere in the, let's just use it, $80 per foot. With the changes, cost increase would have went to, I believe, around $92. That difference of $12 was not picked up by the council. The council awarded the estimate from the year prior of $55. So just so I think you're using two different types of words here. The council did not pick up the $12 change order. The council estimate was what the homeowner saw. So there's quite a big difference between those two numbers. One's 12 and one's like 35. So there's a little bit of a difference there, and that's what the action was. So in conversation with the camp, it's not about, does the city want to pick up the difference if there is a difference? It's, does the city want to go down and give the same price that they gave to Ardsley, which was, instead of 84, 54. So that's how I see that discussion. Change order, that cost with the trees and the handwork, that was just the thing that kind of got the attention at the time.
Anyone else?
Mr. Palomini?
Go ahead, Ms. Saluski-Walzunas.
So I think there's been a lot of discussion here. I agree. I believe the people on DeCamp want this sidewalk program. I think they're deserving of it. They're looking to pay
Has
for
joined
it.
the meeting.
I think what we need to do is determine exactly what the cost would be to the DeCamp residents, make sure that that's communicated to them, make sure everyone's in agreement. And I think we should, take a pause and determine whether or not we have, first of all, support enough to move the program forward, and support from the neighbors to make sure that they want it. And I think it's us looking to ensure that's going to happen. I think we need to be mindful of, rebidding was a great idea, but we were unaware that it was tied with another contract. And it would cost the city an additional $250,000. So I think what we need to do is come up with some sort of a compromise that will, hopefully get these sidewalks done and ensure that it's not, that we're not overpaying. And I don't know if we can go back and negotiate if this any harder with the contractors, which I'm assuming we can't because it's a signed contract. But from my perspective, I think